Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about a tool that has completely transformed the way I plan and navigate my hikes, AllTrails Plus. As a Trailheads ambassador and the organizer of the Yakima Valley Trekkers, I'm out on the trails a lot. One of my favorite features of AllTrails Plus is the ability to edit and create my own maps. Conditions change, fallen trees, washed out sections, or even a last-minute reroute. And with AllTrails Plus, I can adjust my route on the fly and share it with others so everyone stays informed and safe. AllTrails Plus also gives you offline maps, wrong turn alerts, and 3D trail previews to help you stay on track and make the most of your adventure. And the best part, you can get 30% off an AllTrails Plus membership with my exclusive link in the episode show notes. So whether you're planning your next big trek or just looking for a new trail to explore, AllTrails Plus has you covered. Check it out and let's hit the trail. Welcome to Season 14 of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host, Ivan, and each week we're hitting the trails through conversations with extraordinary hikers from across the United States and beyond. Spring has a way of pulling us back out there. Muddy boots, wildflowers pushing through the thaw, and trails that feel brand new, even when we've walked them 100 times before. There's something electric about this season. When the days stretch longer, the snowpack starts its slow retreat, and the mountains finally say, "Come on up." This season, I've had the privilege of sitting down with hikers whose stories carry the same sense of renewal, of fresh starts, new summits, and the kind of momentum that only comes when you've been waiting all winter to lace up and go. From early season ridge walks and creek crossings swollen with snowmelt to the quiet joy of watching the landscape wake up mile by mile, the voices you'll hear this season remind us that the trail is always calling. You just have to answer. So shake off the cabin fever, air out the pack, and get ready. Season 14 is here, and the conversations ahead are as alive, layered, and full of possibility as a Pacific Northwest spring. What if the most powerful story in a national park isn't the landscape? It's the people inside it. NYU-trained filmmaker, Explorers Club member, and director Brendan Hall joins us to share the journey behind Out There, a National Park Story, a feature documentary 7 years in the making, born from a postgraduate road trip across 10,000 miles of America's public lands. Brendan opens up about the Grand Canyon moment under the Milky Way that redirected his entire filmmaking career, how two friends with no plan found trail builder Gary in Acadia simply by asking a librarian, and why his relationship with Yosemite has evolved from a solo sunrise at Tunnel View to surprise engagement at Capitan Meadow. We cover the human tapestry behind the film, Jack Gladstone's Blackfeet stories at Glacier, photographer QT Luong's overlooked legacy, and a filmmaking philosophy built around accessibility over conquest. Brendan also reflects on his time as a selected crew member of the Dear Moon mission, what an Antarctic voyage with deGrasse, Tyson and William Shatner revealed about our planet, and how to carry hope in the face of ecological grief, from bleached coral reefs to smoke-filled wilderness. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Brendan Hall. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really special guest with me today. He's the filmmaker of the documentary Out There, a National Park Story, and he's going to be sharing about his epic road trip that he did with his friend, exploring some of our nation's beautiful national parks and the people that enjoy them and protect them. His name is Brendan Hall. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We always like to start off by having our guests share a little bit about themselves and how they got started hiking.
Yeah, gosh, how did I get started hiking? I think technically my first hikes and exposure to the outdoors was visiting my grandmother growing up. She lived in Sun Valley, Idaho. It still is just the most idyllic place. And I've been to so many national parks and traveled across the country. And I still say that Idaho is the most underrated state in terms of nature, with the Sawtooth Mountains and Redfish Lake. And so I think it kind of normalized it for me, these huge mountains of the West. But I grew up in Connecticut. And so very central Connecticut, right in the suburbs, but we did live on a small lake growing up. And it's been a really special thing for me realizing how much that little piece of water, a lake or a pond, it's like of that smallness, but just like how much nature I experience in that, the sunsets, the starry skies, the critters, the birds. It really felt like as I kept exploring and fell more in love with nature in my adult years, that everything was just like a different or bigger, new version of what I'd already seen at my little lake growing up. So I'd give my grandmother, though, a lot of credit for that first hiking, as she showed me wildflowers, those great peaks, those high mountain lakes. And then it was really in college, I fell in love with road tripping and hiking in national parks, which sort of set my filmmaker journey off in a new direction.
Yeah, I still feel like Idaho is an underrated gem. Definitely recommend folks to check it out if they have a chance. And I'm glad you brought that up, that your love for road tripping started earlier on, because I feel like the film Out There is kind of like a sequel where you did the summer road trip with your childhood friend, but it ended up turning into a 7-year odyssey. Was there a certain point on the trip where you noticed that, this wasn't just a regular road trip, that this was going to be maybe a life-changing journey that could potentially be a documentary?
Yeah, so the genesis of the film, it's a feature documentary. Like you said, it took 7 years to make from start to finish, but really is centered in this road trip that me and my friend Anthony took as I just graduated college. It was kind of this moment where I was in an office job in New York City. It was my first job out of school, and I really dreamed of exploring and dreamed of being on the road and making films where I get to interact with people and share stories in nature. And so for me, doing something in the national parks was just a dream project. Long story short of how I got into doing that kind of filmmaking was I started making films when I was 12, which this year is very reflective for me because I'm turning 32 and it's actually going to be my 20th year of filmmaking. But I always thought I'd want to do kind of Hollywood narrative films. And so I went to NYU Film School, but there was this summer in the middle of college where I road tripped to do an internship in LA. And it was in the film industry. And I thought it was like the beginning of the rest of my life. But when I went out there, I first started hiking and re-experiencing these huge mountains and oceans, doing national parks trips on the weekends. And it was really, with my friend Anthony too, we road tripped back that summer. And especially the moment for me was being at the Grand Canyon for the first time. It was just this like crystallizing moment that really hit me, like being on the edge of the Grand Canyon. We were under this amazing Milky Way and lightning was cracking through it and the Perseid meteor shower was shooting stars through the sky. And it made me want to pursue stories in nature, and especially people's stories, because so much of our story is us experiencing it and getting to see others experience it too. And so getting on the Out There, we set out, we were fresh out of college, and all we knew is that we wanted to create some sort of ode to national parks. I was doing a lot of the filmmaking side, directing and shooting. Anthony, who's now an educator, he's an assistant principal at a high school in Connecticut. He was producing the project and just helping with everything he could, helping build the story as we went along. And to answer your question of how it really set off and turned into this project that it is now, which is Human Stories in the Parks, is we met a first trail builder named Gary in Acadia National Park. And he was this NPS member. He's built the trails in Acadia for 40 years and he's retired now. But at the time we went around with him in his truck and he was showing us all these trails, so much about the park. And you'll see it in the film, but that's the moment we kind of realized that this is a human story. And that's what we pursued to capture. So Out There, you said it well, it did feel like kind of an odyssey because it is this long journey throughout that summer and with some additional filming to tell human stories in the national parks.
You really hit some really great diverse people throughout your journey. And from the trailer, you were able to speak with people from the Blackfoot Reservation near Glacier National Park, other national park staff members. How did you approach each stop with connecting with people in the area to help tell the story of not just the park, but of the public lands around it?
Yeah, so something we did, which was maybe a little reckless at first, but also we were just finding our way as we went along. I can't emphasize enough how much of a small little crew we were. It was just me and Anthony. We had never made anything of this scale. And so going park to park was really just a process of on the fly, finding people to talk to. And Anthony really did a big job of that, is looking online, making phone calls, asking visitor centers. So Gary, that trail builder we found, we really just went into a local library in Bar Harbor and asked the librarians, is there a local legend around here we should talk to? That's how we met him. And then, Jack Gladstone, who's a Blackfeet musician and storyteller, we found him just through a public program he was running in the park, playing music and telling stories when we were going to be there, and then kind of found them on Facebook and reached out. And then Julia, a solo backpacker who's in the film, she was our friend from high school that we connected with on the road. And then QT Luong, a French-Vietnamese photographer, we saw him in the Ken Burns National Park series just for like 40 seconds. And we said, who is that guy and why isn't his story more widely told? And in between, you see all these little voices at viewpoints of just people we meet along the way. And they were just as spontaneous as they looked. And, you spoke to that idea of diversity in parks. And first of all, like our real rule with featuring anyone in the film was they just had to say the perfect thing at the perfect moment. So aside from just their background or their identity or how they connect to a park, it was all about that human tapestry. But we also wanted the film to represent all these different kinds of visitors' experiences that people have in parks, so that hopefully just about anyone that sees the film sees a little piece of themselves in somebody they see. And it's hard because, I would say that our film statistically is probably more diverse in terms of who we talk to than a lot of the crowds you'll see that can afford and access these parks. But we wanted to help create a vision of the kind of parks and accessibility that we also hope to see in the outdoors. And it also just led to us talking to some really interesting people.
I'm glad that you kind of shared that journey. And I know that before we started recording, you mentioned some special moments at Yosemite. And I feel like for you, Yosemite has just a full list of core memories from your first solo weekend in 2014 to ultimately filming the final shots of your documentary there. How has your relationship, especially with that park, evolved as you grew from a solo hiker to now a professional filmmaker?
I think when I started off in my first ever solo weekend, it was in 2014. I remember so strongly, I was doing that internship in LA. I didn't have my Fridays off, so Friday to Sunday was my time to explore. And I knew I wanted to go to Yosemite. And I was so excited that on Thursday night, I finished work and just packed and drove 10 p.m. all the way through the night. I made it to Tunnel View at 7 a.m., just in time for the sunrise. And it was like that first time of seeing a cathedral of nature. I just couldn't believe that sight. And it's such an iconic view, too, that it really hit me. I got the last campsite available at Camp 4. I hiked 10 miles a day and I was just in bliss. It was like one of those first weekends you have and that freedom in these parks that just blows your mind. But I'd say, too, that even back then, like the way I had always learned from other people that you're supposed to experience nature is kind of like through that idea of conquest, of tagging off more parks, hiking more miles, going further, going harder. And there was a real excitement in pushing my boundaries. But I'd say nowadays, over the years, having captured stories in the parks, trying to become more of a hand in their preservation, I'm going back with a lot more kind of softness and reverence for that place and really trying to, instead of just hike peaks and do as much as I can and go as fast as I can, stop and find peace and let my brain kind of settle down and let me recalibrate and recenter from a life that is really fast-paced and chaotic. I live in Brooklyn, and so it's always like honking cars and city noise and airplanes when I'm traveling. And I was telling you before that I actually got engaged in Yosemite last year. It was a long story, but it's really cool that someone we actually met while creating out there in Yosemite, we had wine at a picnic table together, heard that the film was screening in a spring screening with the Yosemite Conservancy, and said, I really want to help support you and Gabby come out here and join the screening. And so, yeah, for me, the idea of kind of a gifted experience in such a special place, it was Gabby's favorite park growing up with her family. It just all really, really felt right. So I proposed in El Capitan Meadow at sunset. It was this really cool moment. I brought little pieces from each of our grandparents to kind of honor that ancestry and legacy. My grandfather's watch, her grandmother's jewelry box, and presented it all in the meadow. And then kind of a really extra fun fact is the final main subject and out there, our film, is QT Luong, who's a large format film photographer. And he came to the park. I surprised Gabby and he took a large format photographs of us as engagement photos. And so you really nailed it of Yosemite is a place that for me now holds like so many memories around every turn that it's the park that I'll drive with my kids someday and say, gosh, I did this here and I proposed here and this is where we had wine and this is my first view. And what's so cool too is I just feel like I've barely scratched the surface of that place. I've got some spots that I love, but man, there's just so much more to see.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. I was sharing that I just visited Yosemite for the first time earlier this year and completely fell in love. Same thing, doing 10-mile days across different trails, but having just the best time there. And what a beautiful moment to be able to experience that with your now wife, and then having that guest come and take a large format picture engagement photo is just incredible. That's really beautiful. And I think it kind of brings back to the trailer for Out There, where a national park ranger, I believe, says that like each national park has a history of stories, but there's still more stories to tell. And I feel like that's Yosemite for you, where you have all these beautiful moments and stories, but there's still so much more in the coming years for you and now your wife and family to be able to enjoy.
Yeah, and Yosemite is such a cool place to reflect on that idea of stories because, it's a big place and there's so much to do, but it's also this one valley that you can kind of go up top and behold in your eye at one time. And when you think of like the climbing history that's happened there, the conservation history, the activism, all the experiences of the millions of people that go through that park every year, it's one of those places that feels kind of like deceptively small, but you think of just that impact of that one preserved landscape. It's really magic, man. I just love it.
Brendan, one thing I did have to ask you because it caught our attention is that you recently directed a Nissan spot here in the Pacific Northwest and praised the humility and accessibility the talent brought to the outdoors. As a filmmaker, how hard is it to balance capturing these epic and untouchable landscapes with also making the outdoors feel welcoming to everyone?
I want the outdoors to always feel like a place that humbles all of us and puts all of us on a level playing field, and try to create space as much that each of us has a place to exist in nature. It really is the most just non-judgmental, all-encompassing kind of place to explore. It's full of love. It's full of adventure for all of us. And I'm trying to learn my best through filmmaking to balance that awe and reverence, and also the idea that not everyone gets to have access to these places. The goal is not just for people who can already access them to have an amazing experience, but to get people in that either haven't had a chance to feel like there's safe space or figure out that bridge economically to either get people into these parks or explore the parks in their backyard. But my approach to stories with people in these places is I really try that rather than taking my external idea or my world and fitting it into their story, taking their internal story and building it outwards through the filmmaking. And so it was really fun doing that Nissan spot because it was all just about the awe and wonder and the family vibes and the accessibility. And it's funny in filmmaking, because you always want conflict, you always want extremes, you always want something pushing the story along. But the stories in parks I gravitate to are actually much more accessible and having less of that conflict at times. It's about how like we can all find ourselves on a trail, and whether you hike 1 mile rather than 20, you're still having your experience. Whereas I think a lot of other stories are about ultra marathons and huge climbs, and which are really cool, but they're these feats that I think aren't as accessible to someone who maybe a family with a minivan in the Midwest that wants to see a park for the first time, So I'm always learning this, and I have so much to learn, but I just hope that this kind of stuff I'm doing is a gateway where someone sees it and says, hey, maybe I could do that too.
Beautifully said. And another thing that caught our attention is something that I think a lot of people also are a fan of, but you described yourself as a fan of a good side quest. How has that mindset, being willing to veer off a planned path, improved your storytelling or your experience out on a hike?
Oh, man. Yeah. I have this motto that I try to live by that's always go for the better story. And what that means to me is not always just going for the most extreme thing, but I feel like there's a lot of times where you're offered the safe path and then the path that's outside your comfort zone, but in your heart of hearts, you just know you really want to do that thing. And so setting out for the out there journey was one of those things where it was really scary. We were just like bootstrapping it, with mostly our personal money and trying to do social media posts for a few people and scrapping it together, and just took the leap to go and do this thing we dreamed of rather than kind of stick with my more stable career in New York. And that to me was definitely the better story at the time. But nowadays too, I see that as an ode to doing the things that are outside your comfort zone that you'll become you'll get a little closer to the kind of person that you want to be, and it'll set you on a wild adventure. And so for me in my career, that's been everything from applying for a journey to go around the moon that led me to be part of a civilian space crew for some time. And even though that mission got canceled, I was like in the footsteps of a group of artists that was going to go to the moon. And then on a really personal level, I've been terrified of dancing forever. I've not been a dancer, although I love music. Yet for my wedding, I chose with my now wife, Gabby, to learn a really complex, first dance, because I said, gosh, this really scares me so much to try. And if I just get through with it, I just know that that's going to bring me closer to the Brendan that I want to be. And it was awesome. And so I'm bringing it back to hiking in the outdoors. What's so cool is that everyone you meet and everything you do in life is such a butterfly effect. And so talking to that person on the bus or while you're hiking that just like a stranger, they just say, man, they're cool. I want to ask them something, or I want to talk to them. Taking a new trail you've never taken, exploring in a way that you never thought that you would, I think is just so cool. If you're someone that's clocking 20 miles a day, maybe you just sit at sunset for 6 hours one day and just watch the whole totality of nature. I think like having some creativity and shaking it up is something that I really love to do. And gosh, I love a good side quest, man. It's brought me to some crazy places, done crazy things. As a filmmaker, it's brought me to all 7 continents to meet some really interesting and wacky people. So anytime there's kind of like a normal path and then a weird and wild one, I'm like, just throw me into the weird. I want to live in that kind of way.
Brendan, you spoke about it, so I did want to touch base on the Dear Moon project, because even though you said, it's not moving forward, you spent years preparing to look at Earth from the moon. And, I think with Artemis 2 just recently happening, the moon and space has really been in a lot of people's minds. How did that macro perspective change the way you look at a singular tree or a trail under your feet today?
That's a really thoughtful way to frame that question. I'll backtrack a little bit just so that a fresh viewer gets some context, because it's a pretty wild, talk about a side quest, it's a pretty wild story. And, the long story short is early 2021, I saw a news article online saying that a Japanese billionaire had bought the first ever seats on SpaceX's Starship, which is their kind of flagship giant rocket that they're building to go to the moon and beyond. And he was going to take 8 different artists and creatives with him on the first ever civilian journey around the moon. At the time, they thought it happened as soon as 2023 or 2025, and they were doing an open call for submissions of what artists will join us on this journey. And I just saw it in a news article one day, put my name in the hat, and it was off the heels right as I was finishing editing Out There. And, thinking of what I learned in the parks, I said, there's really a similar story here with space of what will our reactions be going around the moon, and how can we capture that moment of someone really appreciating all of this and when it hits them. I think astronauts are trained to be almost unreactive to experiences. I think that we have never gotten to see artists go into deep space. And so I was like, what will happen when this highly sensitive group of people whose whole role on this earth is to communicate their experiences through a medium, how is that going to unfold? And I told Dear Moon, I said, even if you don't select me, I just pray, I ask you to make this a human story. We have seen Earthrise, and we've seen a lot of these moments, but it should be about the transformation before, during, and after of everyone going. And so, man, long story short is through a year-long process, I got through interview after interview. I did Zoom interviews, a medical exam at UCLA Hospital, in-person interviews with Yusaku Maezawa, the billionaire who was putting all this together. And then I was eventually selected to be a part of the mission around Thanksgiving of 2021. There was like a year before it was announced, but like quietly I started telling family and friends. And then eventually it was announced publicly. And that was just crazy. I went on the Today Show talking about it. I did podcasts and interviews, and we never got to the point where we were doing real training for the mission. But there was this like 2-year period where I was meeting astronauts, going to space launches in the VIP sections. We met, the highest up and the high ups at SpaceX, and just had these crazy experiences. We went to Baikonur, Russia, and saw like a rocket launch in Baikonur where they had launched all the Soviet rockets from, because the billionaire MZ went to the International Space Station for a week. And it was just a remarkable experience. And sadly, it was canceled. Yusaku Maezawa decided almost 2 years ago, I think now, which is crazy, that he didn't want to wait any longer for the mission to happen. He wanted to put his money and his time elsewhere. And, I can't speak for truly what he wanted or what his decision-making was there. But, my guess is that he didn't want to wait. My guess is that he wanted to move on. with his life, although I won't know exactly what he wanted. But yeah, so it went from this like big dream and this thing was happening, I was on the cover of the hometown paper and doing all of this, to it drying up. And there was this question of like, what happens when you crash land back on Earth? When a dream kind of ends short and puts you back in a place that you were before. And, over time, it was really hard to swallow, but I was immediately filled with gratitude. I think like the side quest leads you where the side quest is going to leave you. And I already was meeting explorers and astronauts and living this kind of life I had dreamed of with getting access to some of these people and stories. But more than anything, I think I felt the sense of relief that I didn't expect, where I love being on Earth. I love my partner, Gabby, and my parents and my friends, and the weight of the mortality, the risk of mortality, the risk of tragedy happening in something like that in a historic mission is not zero. It's quite high compared to some other things. And what I've come to learn over time is that like the whole appreciation you get when you do a mission like that is really looking back at the Earth and realizing how just precious this is. And so that same bit of light and little orb that the Earth is that we saw in Artemis, like that's the point of going out there, is to just be so ready to come back home. And those astronauts did a beautiful job of communicating that. It's been such a joy to see. And so, you had asked about being in the trees and being here on Earth. It really has put me in a place where I'm just so grateful to be here. I always loved this place, but I've only come to like love myself more being comfortable just being here on Earth and with the day-to-day experiences. It made me recalibrate, and like you can't see it because we're audio only, but off to my left, a little cactus in my office is blooming, and I have my camera trying to shoot a time lapse over 24 hours to capture it. I see the sunset come into my room here in Brooklyn, and like those are kind of really the moments I live for. And so, yeah, I know it's kind of like a deep answer, but it was big for me. That whole journey really brought me right back, where hiking and experiencing these like smaller wonders day to day just feels so much better.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my next question, is because one thing that you did and got to experience that I think is high on a lot of people's lists, and people that have visited Antarctica have said it's otherworldly. And what I loved about your experience is that you brought your Super 8 camera to kind of capture Antarctica and this fever dream feeling that you had there. And, you mentioned doing your time lapse with your cactus right now. For listeners who want to document their adventures or those, beautiful moments in nature, how do you personally decide when to put the camera down and just experience the wonder that you often talk about?
Yeah, that trip to Antarctica was really crazy. It was a voyage called Space to Sea, and it was bringing legends of space together with that bottom of the planet that really feels like another world. So we were out there with Neil deGrasse Tyson, William Shatner was on the voyage, Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon, Jose Hernandez and Scott Kelly, two astronauts, Celine Cousteau, kind of ocean legend. And it was just amazing to see what's already such an otherworldly place, like through their eyes. And to just be on a ship and you're looking at Antarctica and then turn and Neil deGrasse Tyson is there talking about it with like his booming voice. It was just a really wild experience. But you asked about when to put a camera down and when to keep it up. For me, a lot of these experiences I've gotten to have, that voyage being a great one to talk about, is like my barter to the universe is that for whatever reason, I'm getting to have that experience. And then I feel like that what I give back is capturing it. I'm really proud to like serve a purpose and a role in something like that. And that feeling of hopefully bringing some of that wonder and that experience back to people who don't get a chance to experience it themselves. So I think like, especially for me when I'm, there's travel that I do just for joy and just for myself. And then travel that I do for work, for art, and especially the work and art side, I'm filming a lot. And a common thing people ask is like, does that disconnect you from the experience to have a camera in front of you or a screen? But I found that it really connects me to the experience even more, where I'll lay on the ground and get a shot of a dewdrop and spend just like an hour trying to get that perfect angle and moment with it. And bless people that can. But for me, like that's my excuse to go do that. And especially someone who moves very fast in life, filming and photographing things makes me slow down and spend a couple hours to get that perfect moment of a Milky Way to kind of get down or try to get a wide landscape in the best way I can. So it actually makes my awareness a lot stronger in the little moments around me. But I think it's important to note too that especially in this age of social media and filmmaking, always living for the sake of thinking of how you'll share something is actually living outside yourself in some ways. And it's hard for me because I'll have moments where like a flower is just so beautiful, but I'm starting to think too much of how I'll share it and not enough about just like the joy of getting the best photo I can. And so I'm always recalibrating to try to make it kind of an inward experience first and for my own joy and appreciation. You know, for people that are just rabid for photography and filmmaking, I actually think we got to give ourselves a little grace and just say, you know, it's awesome. And it's a really cool way to explore, to obsess, and to say, wow, that mountain's epic. Like, how can I possibly capture that as closely as I can to just the feeling of the whole thing? And that for me, that's a lifetime pursuit. You know, I could spend many lifetimes running around trying to do that. And so it just always fills me with wonder for all that.
Now, Brendan, one thing that you've done a really great job is your work with the Nature Conservancy. You've seen action paired with hope in the face of environmental loss. When you're hiking through these places like the Desolation Wilderness, especially knowing how fire impacted it shortly after your visit, how did you process the ecological grief while staying inspired?
Gosh, that's such a great question. Man, you know, I first heard the word ecological grief working for the Nature Conservancy and talking with their coral restoration teams out in the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys are a really hard place to love the ocean and protect it. These researchers have seen hundreds or thousands of year-old reefs get essentially wiped out and bleached within just a couple weeks during heat waves, as well as spent years to create genetically modified and resilient coral just to see them get wiped out in almost overnight during a heat wave. And so I learned a lot about how much conservationists, scientists, those working to make a change can love a place and keep carrying on their hope, because their work has to have hope, right? Because if you don't believe in a future where coral can get better, you can't put in that work to preserve it. But it's all in the face of what's really devastating loss. You know, I try to balance with, Out There's a very positive film, and it's meant to tap into wonder and appreciation. And it's created kind of with that idea that a lot of people say is when you love something, you want to protect it, and that love and that reverence for a place makes you want to go and preserve it. But it's been really hard to see that level of loss, whether it's being in the Desolation Wilderness where we actually almost couldn't backpack because of the levels of smoke. And just the day after we got out, it was unhealthy even with a mask to be backpacking there, down to coral reefs getting bleached. I've dove reefs 5 years apart that went from being healthy and vibrant to just bleached and decimated. And obviously there's so many more stories like that. I do really try to have hope, and I do really try to find joy. I'm a big believer in this idea. I have this friend, Sanjana Sikar, that has a newsletter called Garmi, and she's a climate activist, but also carries herself with so much hope. And she kind of talks about how like waking up each day and trying to live with joy is helping create the world that you want to see and helping bring that energy into other people's lives. And so, you know, the short answer is like there's endless devastation that we could talk about. And there's also endless stories of resilience, of solutions that work, legislations that work, the same way there's legislations that are also, you know, tearing our environment apart. God, the difficulty of seeing the National Park Service be defunded, cut with staff, the National Forest Service, even in this past week or two of recording this, being dismantled and their headquarters moved. It's a really tough time to look and see this all happen, but a really critical time for us to come together and keep fighting and hunker down and see what we can do for these places.
I think in Washington State, we're losing 2 of those stations, but I will say it has been inspiring over the last year and a half, seeing the outdoor community come together and really make a strong and collaborative voice about protecting these public lands and being successful in the eyes of, you know, potential negative impacts to these public lands. And kind of going back to the fire, you know, we had the retreat fire here in Washington 2 years ago, and it impacted one of our local trail systems, thinking that it was going to be decimated, it wasn't going to be the same for decades. But this year we got to hike on it, and to see the resiliency of nature coming back to life. You know, you still have the burn scars, but just seeing how resilient nature is and kind of coming back to life has been really inspiring as well. It's definitely a hard time out there, but I think your voice and the other voices here in the public space when it comes to the outdoors is really critical in protecting these beautiful, magical places.
Yeah, and like you said, nature will always win. There's always going to be the burnt log where you see a new leaf sprouting and it reclaims itself. And so we're kind of we're sometimes missing a bit of the point when we're just focused on nature and preserving nature. What we're also preserving is our own experience in these places, is our clean water and our air that we can breathe, our lands that we can bring our children to and kind of coexist with, and our life ways. But ultimately, nature's going to push through. Long after we're gone, there's still going to be that sprout of a leaf and it's going to reclaim and come back. And, the movement is to make all of our lives as rich and and beautiful as they're meant to be, just as much as preserving these places. It really goes hand in hand. And so I think the war on our forests and our resources is just a war on ourselves. It's just a question of when does everyone come to realize that?
Powerful statement there, Brendan. One thing I did want to congratulate you on is your recent EC50 recognition. And I'm hoping you can share a little bit about it with the listeners. But one thing that I love about your voice is you believe we're all explorers. And for someone who doesn't feel like a hardcore adventurer, what is the first step in reclaiming that identity in their own local parks or trails?
So there's this really cool organization. It's called the Explorers Club. It's headquartered in New York, but has explorers all around the world. They've been around since the early 1900s, and we're kind of the hub for some of the first great explorations, which they kind of call when people were sort of chasing dragons off the earth. And what they mean by that is members of the Explorers Club did the first summits of Everest, first to the North Pole, first to the South Pole, first to the Moon, first to the Marianas Trench. During all of those expeditions, they were either members of the club. Neil Armstrong had an Explorers Club flag with him going up to the moon. And it's been this through line in exploration that, archaeologists and paleontologists and scientists and storytellers have been a part of this club. And now there's actively about 3,500 members around the world. And so, during my era where I was selected for Deer Moon, it was the synthesis of finishing out there. I became connected with them just by kind of a random chance, being at a friend's birthday party here in New York, and met the president of the club. And he was just like, man, you should just apply. And it was a really powerful moment for me. This sounds kind of crazy, but at the time I was in the footsteps and I was supposed to go to the moon, right? And so the ticket was bought, it was on the news and all that stuff, but I still didn't feel like an explorer. And I think that's because, I've always had this complex relationship with my own adventure, my own masculinity, my own feeling that I love pushing hard and traveling as much as I can, but I'm not accomplishing any crazy feats. I'm not the person under the sea ice doing the craziest deep dive. I'm not the person that's trying to summit Everest. So it was a weird feeling that I would be an explorer. But I got into the club, I was brought in, and I had this really cool moment where Deer Moon was canceled, right? And there was this 1 month period before it was announced to people where no one knew it was canceled, but I did. And it was really hard because I did a talk at one point and met some astronauts, and I did just pretend it was going on. And it was really just hard on my psyche. And the Explorers Club called me and said, do you want to be a speaker at our Global Exploration Summit? We'll fly you to the Azores. You can go speak. It's like a TED-style talk. You're going to speak alongside some of the greatest explorers in the world. And I had to level with them and say, it's not public yet, but I'm no longer a part of this moon journey. And it was really a deep moment for me because I was like, man, I just was never meant to do this in the first place. I'm not an explorer. And they just pretty immediately said, look, explorations fail all the time. All of us have a string of failures behind us that led us to where we need to go. And this just happens. So get out here, come give this talk, and you're part of this here. And so I went out and I gave that talk, and I made it so much about my national parks journey with some of the moon journey and how we kind of preserve these stories over time. And I even had a little screening out there with a bunch of explorers of my parks film. And they've been the most amazing advocates for it. And so it really speaks to them and their spirit of bringing me in. But like, I really love that message that we're all explorers, you know, and at least in kind of like a matter of spirit, like we're all astronauts, right? We're on the spaceship Earth. We're each exploring in our own lives. And the way that someone explores, you know, caterpillar turning into a butterfly, I think is just as important as someone that explores the top of Everest. And an exploration is kind of any sort of path that curiosity leads you on. And so if you don't feel like an explorer, just remember that your journey is going to be different than everyone else's. And the most important thing you could ever do is align with the journey that you're meant to be on and the journey you're meant to take, like kind of deep in your heart. And so if you're chasing someone's goals and you think that you need to be like them, you might actually be drifting away from who you're meant to be. And I've had to learn that a lot and have been very humbled that, you know, my road trips aren't unique. A lot of people road trip. A lot of people see the Milky Way. A lot of people every year get to do some of that stuff. And it's actually really brought me into this cool space of seeing that reflected through other people and how everyone connects to a park. Gary in our film was a park ranger for 40 years. Julia was a backpacker that says, you don't have to go that far. I just do, you know, I have the heaviest backpack and I only go like a few miles some days. And so like just everyone's experience is going to be really different. And, you know, you can't take life too seriously. Like if you're having fun and you're having a great time, like there's your exploration.
Powerful message. I'm going to have to listen back to that quote that if you focus on somebody else's journey, you're kind of drifting away from your own or where you're meant to be. That's powerful because I think a lot of the time, especially when it comes to hiking and backpacking, we do see these people, whether on social media or on YouTube, and we kind of expect that to be the experience, but everyone's different. And I think it kind of goes back to that old saying of hike your own hike. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. You know, some people might need the 15, 20 mile days, where others might just need one or two. So beautiful message, powerful message. Brendan, you know, we talked about this before we started recording. When this episode gets released, you're going to be making your way out west and doing a couple screenings of the film. For folks that are interested in learning more about the film and where they could potentially see some upcoming screenings, where are some of the places they can find the information on?
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking that. So the best way to stay in touch with Out There, our website is outthere.film, no .com, just outthere.film. You can sign up for our newsletter. There is a screenings tab on there, which is pretty regularly updated, as well as my Instagram. It's just Brendan Film, BRENDAN. And then our Out There Instagram is outthere.film. And so we're going to keep releasing screenings, and our goal is this fall. So from like late August through the fall, we have a lot of cool announcements to make in terms of in-person screenings, theaters, and then a big digital release where we're going to work with nonprofits all over the country to host digital pages where you can watch Out There and also have a really great percentage of that rental that goes back to the organization. You know, that's been really important to us. It's pretty cool. We've now done like 25 film festivals and over 75 community screenings to, I think, was probably past like 18,000 audience members in person. Just last year, I went to 39 Q&As and screenings. We screened as far as Alaska, the U.S. Virgin Islands out west, Acadia in the east, Cuyahoga in the middle of the country, and all over. And so, yeah, you know, a few of our upcoming screenings are in the Grand Canyon, Albuquerque, both in kind of mid-May. It'll be past this podcast, sadly, but I'm excited as I'll be in the Tetons for May 2nd. But we plan to keep announcing more as well as virtual events. And so we'd love to have you all stay tuned. And, you know, my personal dream as a filmmaker right now is that both we have an awesome release, but it also kind of keeps people around in a community that say, we kind of love this connection in the outdoors. We love this joy, this wonder. Let's all stick around and kind of like buzz and create more content and, you know, allow us to tell more stories. And so that's our goal, is like get the film out to as many people as want to see it. And then we're creating some really cool online tools that'll help people explore what's out there for them.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll be sure to put those links in the episode show notes so people can check it out. And if folks get a chance, definitely look at the screenings tab and see if there's a local screening in your area. Because like you said, it's going to be at the Grand Canyon. I want to say the Tetons is already sold out, but there's still opportunities in New Mexico. And stay tuned because there might be some opportunities closer to home. And I personally, if you could come back to the Pacific Northwest, I know I missed it in November, but would love to get a chance to do a screening out out here, whether it's in Washington or Oregon or even Idaho?
Yeah, I'm hoping to. We don't have anything locked in, but the goal, which I hope, is that we can do a series of community screenings, theater screenings, that around that time, like National Parks Week, late August into September, it creates a ripple around the country where there's 3-4 weeks where hopefully in a lot of these cities, people can go out and see the film. So please do stay tuned, and we're going to be working hard to piece it all together. We're a totally independent project, grassroots, donation driven, and we kind of chose to build it that way because we thought it was the right thing to do for parks, and the right way to get the film out is kind of direct to communities. And so we're trying to build that capacity actively, and I'm hoping we make a bigger splash this fall to get it all around the country.
Definitely can't wait to see what's coming down the pipeline. Well, that was it for the regular questions. This last section of questions are questions that we like to ask all our guests. The first one is, when it comes to hiking, do you have any pre-hike rituals or maybe first mile mindsets that you like to practice on a regular basis?
Ooh, I should get better at that. Something I've been doing more and more is I feel that as I'm turning 32, and so I'm still young, but I'm like a decade older than I was when I was first doing a lot of these parks. Life has only gotten busier, and New York has only built its way into my nervous system even more. And so I really try to be at ease with myself in that first mile, that beginning of a hike, that I'm not immediately just going to fall into the nature, and I might still have intrusive thoughts, and I might still be downloading from the world around me. And so I really just try to get the jitters out and be tender with myself so that by the end of the hike or by the end of that camping weekend, I feel really recentered. So I'd say my only ritual right now is being at ease with myself, that my head might be somewhere else at first, but that's just chapter 1, right? And the goal is to shake it out and hike it out over time.
And this one's one of the listeners' favorites. What's your go-to post-hike meal or drink?
Oh my gosh. Truthfully, a crisp beer and a burger with fries is the magic sauce for me. It's so good. I mean, if you want to, maybe I'll have to do this for my birthday when I go to the Tetons, but coming off of a big hike in that environment, clocking a bunch of miles and getting that good physical activity, and then having a nice greasy burger and a crisp beer on top of one of those porches, at that specific kind of bar, tavern, restaurant that you get out in the Western Mountain States, that's totally my happy place. And man, when it's cold outside, if you can get to a ramen restaurant, that's another just something that hits so right when your body is a little bit chilled and you need to come down a little bit.
Good choices. Good choices. Now, I'm interested in this response because as a filmmaker, I'm wondering, is there one piece of gear you'll never compromise on?
Oh, that's a great question. I think nowadays it's some kind of camera, but gosh, every time that I say I'm going to leave my camera at home, I just need to be present, I kind of end up regretting it because there's some moment I want to capture, some piece of joy that I would have found in capturing it. And so I always bring something, and obviously phones are really great too. But a cool tip that I learned from a friend is that sometimes you could just bring a disposable camera or two rather than a digital camera. And it has that blend of getting to have a beautiful photo of something, especially that textured kind of disposable film vibe, but also feeling really grounded and present. I know it's a cheesy thing as a filmmaker to mention that, but it's to mention the idea of a camera is the one thing I would bring. But I've learned to be kind to myself a bit, yeah, you will want to capture that moment. And at the very least, getting photos of friends, photos of your loved ones, being on the hike is an awesome experience, but then remembering it for those years is the return on investment you get when you get to reflect on all this good stuff,
For Yosemite, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I did take a disposable camera because anytime I visit a park for the first time, I like to take just a cheap disposable camera. And then this way, once I do get a chance to get it developed, because now you have to send it out, it's always great to relive those moments that you forgot that you captured on that disposable camera. So that's a great choice.
Yeah, I shoot a lot of Polaroids too. So I have a Polaroid camera, and that's really fun because, film lived with you in that moment, but you get it as digital files, and that's how you really experience it. But a Polaroid was developed while it was there with you. It kind of took that moment and developed into itself in that moment, and then you get it right away. And so I didn't realize it over years. Something I've learned a lot as an artist and a filmmaker is a long-term investment in something and how beautiful that becomes over time. So I started with my Polaroids just saying, I'm just going to shoot at this road trip. I'll shoot at this friend's gathering. I'll shoot at this thing. And then time goes on, and it's my grandmother has passed. Our family dogs have passed away at this point. I have friends that I haven't seen in years, events that I just want to cherish and remember. And I go through my Polaroid album and I have all these physical pieces of media that were there with that person or with that place and that thing. And so I wouldn't have realized that, at the beginning, but I think like thinking of not just a practice that you have, like shooting some photos, bringing a disposable camera, but like, wow, in 10 years, how much am I going to love that I was, captured a little bit of that experience for myself, whether it's a journal note or a photo, just something.
So true. And then on the flip side, and this could be outdoor gear or even film or photography gear, but what's one piece of gear that you find has been overrated in your experience?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about this because I don't want to talk down on any really cool pieces of gear, I will say for some length hikes, I've loved doing them without a backpack. So I'll fill up a huge water bottle, I'll carry it or I'll clip it to my belt. I'm very pale, so I'll bring a little thing of sunscreen sometimes if I need that, and maybe like a trail bar, right? And then probably have my phone just because it's a good emergency device, even if I have it turned off. But there's this like really amazing feeling for me of like, okay, I got boots, a belt, a hat, clothes, sunscreen, water, and a snack. I'm good for like a whole day, even if I kind of ramble off or get lost a little bit. And so that's something that I love, was just that freedom of what's the minimal that I can bring, but still checking all my boxes of safety. Whereas when I have a backpack, I think I tend to bring a lot more than I need. And so I'm not saying backpacks are overrated, but I think it's underrated to take a hike without all that stuff and just have that freedom of exploring around. It's like priceless to me.
And then the last question is, I know that we're a fourth of the way into 2026, but is there any hiking or adventure goals that you have for the remainder of the year, and anything exciting on the horizon that we should look out for?
I think my goal is to just really appreciate the parks I get to go to, and especially that I screen at, and to refocus my awareness of what's around me and appreciating all of this. I've gotten to travel so much. I have some months where I'm like in a different place for 2 or 3 weekends and back-to-back planes that it kind of starts gelling together a little bit, and I lose a little appreciation for that stillness, and I go, oh, I photographed all these sunsets. Like, why should I sit for this one? And so I think my main goal is to like recalibrate on some of that joy and appreciation of being outside. And it's a really reflective year for me, like I said, with the 20 years since first starting to make films. I'm screening and speaking at the Grand Canyon, so it's full circle of that moment. I'm speaking at my high school's graduation, so it's full circle on that. And so I'm really just trying to like appreciate memories and savor what's already happened and just like be right here, right now. And, it's not a nature story as much, but me and my wife, Gabby, are now thinking about taking some time out of New York. And so we're really seeing this summer as our time to appreciate this place that for me has been like 14 years, including college and the birth of a lot of career and memories and friends. And so I'll be hitting up the botanical gardens in my local parks, Prospect Park, the Catskills, those upstate weekends, and just really savoring this moment in time while I'm doing this,
Well, that was it for the regular questions. This last section of the podcast is the this or that questions. I'm going to give you some hiking related topics, and you can choose which one you prefer out of the two, but you're more than welcome to say both or neither. But the first one is, when it comes to these two types of views, do you like a dense forest or wide open views?
Oh my gosh, definitely both, but I'm going to go wide open for now. But dense forests are so good. There's just so much to see. I know it's supposed to be a short answer, but that's really hard. We're starting hard, man. That's tough for me.
And this one might be hard too, but peak bagging or wandering miles?
Ooh, wandering miles, actually, for sure.
And then one that's been surprisingly tough for folks is cabin stay or tent camping.
I have to... Yeah, I'm going to elaborate a little on this. I'm going to say cabin stay, but my happiest moments, I think, end up being when I'm backpacking, and like my golden place is doing 4 days at least, being with friends or my partner, and like by day 3, I just am totally grounded and present again in that place, and you get to see just some of the craziest landscapes. So I will say that's like pinnacle life experience for me, but more often than not, I'm actually really growing attuned to a cabin or a glamping stay or even car camping where you have a few more comforts sports because it leaves me with more energy to wake up and get after that park sometimes. And so, gosh, I got to say, there's a lot of days where having a shower and a really great night's sleep actually just make me way more excited to get up and do it again the next day. So ask me 10 years ago and I would have had so much pride about camping, but I gotta be real.
Yeah, that post-hike shower hits a little different. Now, this next one's a tough one because I know in the East Coast, they're known, especially during the spring and summer. But if you had to choose between these two, bug bites or blisters?
Wow, definite bug bites, I think. Blisters are rough, especially on your feet, consistent pain. Bug bites will never get fun, and I've tried so hard to build a resistance and be tough about it, but I just hate them. And I'm gonna go bug bites. I'd rather itch than have pain with every step that I take, you know?
And then this one's our most controversial one this season, but when it comes to packing on those long miles, are you a person that enjoys either music, an audiobook, or even a podcast with earbuds on, or do you like to just embrace nature and hear only nature sounds?
I think I'm usually kind of 50-50 between nature sounds and music. I think I'd probably do more audiobooks and podcasts if I was living in a place where I was hiking really regularly. I'm not as good here in New York as getting out every week to hike. A lot of my activity is biking, going for runs, going to the gym, but I'm kind of 50-50. I love music that gets me kind of pumped, and when you're in that physical activity side, need to get up that hill or push a little harder, it really helps you soar. But when I'm just reconnecting and taking it easy, I love just hiking and talking to friends and things like that.
And this next one's about your footwear. Do you use trail runners or traditional hiking boots?
Traditional hiking boots. And then when I'm doing maybe anything below 3 to 5 miles, I might just wear whatever sneakers I have, or I'll even wear my Blundstones because they're plenty rugged and I wear them all the time and I've gotten so comfortable with them.
The new one for this season is about outsoles. The Vibram has definitely been a big player, but some people just are okay with the brand outsole. Does it matter for you, Vibram or brand?
I'm going to say based on the hiking I do, it doesn't matter for me as much, but I'd certainly get into something more specialized if I had the chance to hike more than I do. So I'm going to go just generic off the shelf, but with the caveat that that's not an opinion that everyone should do that. That's just what works for me as someone who doesn't get the chance to hike quite as much as I'd like to these days.
This next one's another tough one, especially out in the East Coast, some of those summits on the Catskills. But if you had to choose, windy or cloudy summit?
Ooh, I think windy. Yeah. God, you just feel so alive sometimes when you get to the summit of a hike and that wind's hitting you and blowing through your hair. Even the wind where it's just so intense, you feel like you have to grab something just to hang on. I think that's where it's at. You know, the filmmaker side of me too, though, will say there's been some real cloudy days of photography and filmmaking that actually turn into some of the coolest shots and conditions. And if there's anything I've learned on that side, it's you roll with the weather that you have. You can't make a cloudy day look sunny and vice versa. And so when you get that good drama and that moody landscape, it can be some of the most epic views you get, you know.
Oh, for sure. And this one I think I know the answer to, but if you had to choose, national park or hidden gems?
Oh, wow. This actually might surprise you, but I think I'm starting to lean more hidden gems. It goes back to what I said about growing up on this lake, which is the smallest little suburb lake, but realizing how much beauty and nature is in it. There's some sunsets there that take my breath away the same as they do in Yosemite or wherever you go. And, you know, the sad truth of it is that the national parks have gotten so much more crowded and used. The, schedule systems to control visitation, the rise of TikTok and these online shares, revealing all of these spots. The parks did an amazing job of marketing themselves since the centennial in 2016. And now, aside from some shoulder seasons, it leads to them being pretty intense to get to. And so I'm actually falling in love with, state parks and monuments and recommendations locally. And when I meet a local that kind of has a special spot and they don't want too many people to know about it, I'm like, that's the place to go, So I actually got to lean hidden gems.
And then this one's a tough one, but spring wildflowers or fall colors?
Oh, you're killing me. That was so mean to ask people. Well, I grew up in Connecticut, so I should be partial to fall colors, but I'm going to go spring wildflowers. I really fell in love growing up with the 4 seasons of winter turning into spring and the summer of abundance, and then the fall, kind of that life drying up and turning into the winter to all be restored. And so I think just kind of on a spiritual level, seeing that new growth of the flower flowers and everything coming back really takes me out of that chill of winter and that darkness. And so that's where it's at. I love that so much.
And then the last one is, when it comes to type 1, type 2, type 3 with outdoors, do you have a preference between type 1 fun or type 2 fun?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I love that we're talking to a viewership that knows what this is. I think if I'm being honest with myself, type 2 fun, because I think that's a lot of what I do is fun, but also being met with like the challenge of getting there and being outside my comfort zone. And so, if I'm going to do the always go for a better story, I think I'm definitely in that type 2 fun category of the significance of a good challenge or some suffering to get to where you need to go.
Like that. And I definitely feel like they stick in your memory a little bit more, especially if you have to work to reach some of these places. Well, that was it for the this or that questions. For folks that want to learn more about your previous film projects out there, as well as what you have coming up, where are some of the places they can follow you both online and on social media?
Yeah, I think if you're on Instagram, my Instagram is just Brendan Film. My website is brendanhall.com. Yeah, I think those are the best places to stay in touch. If you go to my website, if you go to Out There's website, outthere.film, I have a link to my email on both of them. So whether it is following along quietly on Instagram or sending me an email and connecting and talking about something that I might have mentioned, I'm around. If there's anything I love, it's meeting new people and getting to share this journey with others. And so I'm always open.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to speak with us. I am really excited about what 2026 has to offer for not just you, but also the film out there. And I'm hoping to get a chance to capture one of the screenings once you make it out to the West Coast. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with us, and looking forward to what the rest of the year has to offer for you.
My pleasure. It's the year of the fire horse, as they say. And so I hope that everyone just has an awesome year full of that great energy.
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Brendan. We extend a heartfelt thanks to him for joining us on the podcast. Be sure to check out his film, Out There, A National Park Story. A screening tour and digital release with nonprofit partnerships are rolling out through 2026. And for more, be sure to check out the episode show notes. This episode of Hikes and Mics was produced by Jordan Smith. Be sure to follow her adventures on Instagram at jordan.journeys. New episodes will drop every Monday throughout the spring hiking season, with the occasional Friday bonus episode along the way. To make sure you never miss a moment of these inspiring trail stories, hit that follow or subscribe button. Your support truly keeps this community moving forward, one episode at a time. Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. That's where you'll find behind-the-scenes episode visuals, my own spring hiking adventures, and plenty more to keep that fresh air stoke alive as the season heats up. As we wrap up today's journey, remember, the trails are waking up, the wildflowers are on their way, and there's never been a better time to get out there and explore. So tread those happy trails, soak in the sunshine, and keep chasing what's just around that next bend. Until next time, my fellow hikers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow along with him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade, it's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, ursaminooroutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, ursaminooroutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.